Who is Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus? He was the man who you wanted to be friends with. Pompey was the most imposing figure to emerge in the aftermath of Sulla, and in some respects you could say that he was the heir to Sulla. Yet when he is talked about, it is usually in contrast with Julius Caesar. However, Pompey had a very successful career all the way up until the civil war with Julius Caesar. Marked by ruthlessness and terror in his early military years, he was termed the Young Terminator, and his nickname Magnus was given to him by Sulla. But this was not enough for Pompey. He demanded a triumph and was the first ever equite to celebrate one, in his 20s no less. But let's not jump ahead of ourselves. Pompey was born on September 29th, 106 BC. He rose to prominence under Sulla, and he was trained early on in the military by his father. But in order to talk about Pompey Magnus, we must first establish the Pompeii Gens, or clan. The Pompeian clan really establishes itself under Pompey's father, Gnaeus Pompeius Strabo. Although we do have the first Pompeius mentioned in 141, the consul Quintus Pompeius, who was consul again in 131. However, Quintus Pompeius is probably not closely related to Pompey Magnus, and it is a matter of conjecture when dealing with the family relationships of the Pompeii. Pompeius Strabo was consul in the year 89 during the Social War. The Social War was a war between the Romans and their Italian subjects. To really oversimplify it, the majority of Italians were fighting for citizenship and a minority wanted independence. Strabo was sole consul for most of his term because his colleague Lucius Porcius Cato had died in battle against the Marsi. Strabo was subject to Marsi, the Marrucini, the Paeligni, and the Vestini, as well as successfully besieging Asculum. But it is this region, which is known as Picenum, that Strabo will exert his influence and create a region that will remain loyal to him and to his son Pompey Magnus. Picenum will become Pompeian territory through the efforts of Strabo. This will also happen to Transpadane Gaul, where Strabo will pass a law granting those north of the Po River Latin status, meaning they can gain citizenship through municipal office. These two regions will become a great source of manpower for the Pompeians. Strabo also granted citizenship to a squadron of Spanish cavalry, which will give a Pompeian connection to Spain that Pompey Magnus will eventually utilize. When Sulla became consul in 88, he saw Strabo as a threat and attempted to recall Strabo to Rome to pull him away from his army, but Strabo blocked the attempt by appointing a friendly tribune who vetoed the motion. Sulla had similar success to that of Strabo. The Senate appointed the consul Pompeius Rufus as a successor to Strabo, but Strabo's army was loyal to him, and Strabo wasn't about to give up his command. The consul was killed. Sulla made no move against Strabo, but instead left to fight Mithradites. During the whole fiasco between Octavius and Marius and Cinna, Strabo played both sides, and for this the people of Rome hated him. While in negotiations with Cinna, a plague had ravaged him and his army. Strabo died of the plague. His funeral was broken up by a rioting mob, who desecrated his body by dragging it through the mud. Now, where was Pompey Magnus during all of this? We know that he received military training early on by his father and served in the army during the Social War. We know that he was there at the siege of Asculum, and he was present during the war between Octavius and Marius and Cinna. The death of Pompey's father left him alone in politics. While he was a nobilis, his name was still rather new, and a lot of people hated his father. He did not come from a legendary line, such as the Scipii or the Ahenobarbii. Pompey only had the regions of which his father Strabo had built up a connection in. Pompey was clever, though. He knew exactly what was needed to be successful. He knew the value of loyal troops, of playing both sides, building up his influence and clientele, and more. Pompey had learned a lot from his father, and we will see this behavior over and over again until the end of his life. Left on his own, Pompey eventually sided with Cinna, but Cinna was killed early on in 84 BC during his consulship by mutinous troops at Ancona. Carbo, the other consul, continued preparation for Sulla's eventual return. Once Sulla had returned to Italy, Pompey, along with many others, had deserted Sulla's enemies and joined up with him, and these men would profit from Sulla's camp, enjoying high offices as well as profiting from the proscriptions. But how was Pompey able to just switch sides without consequence? Well, Pompey took advantage of his father's clientele, which he inherited. Pompey recruited a private legion from Picenum, and with this legion he checked the proconsul, Sulla's enemy, Carbo, as well as overcoming several Marian officers on his way to join Sulla, where Sulla accepted Pompey's offer of his legion and hailed him as imperator, which was a compliment. Of course, Pompey hailed Sulla the same way. Sulla remembered Pompey's father Strabo, and so saw Pompey as a problem. To remedy this, Sulla offered his pregnant stepdaughter, who was already married to Marcus Acilius Glabrio, to Pompey, who accepted the offer. Pompey was made pro-praetor, and served with Metellus Pius in Picenum in Umbria, where he continued to recruit more men. Sulla then sent him to deal with the proconsul, who had fled to Sicily. Pompey captured and put to death Carbo, and then devoted himself along with his legate and brother-in-law, Gaius Memmius, to the reorganization of Sicily, where Pompey no doubt established further clientele. Then a decree from the Senate and a letter from the now dictator Sulla arrived in Pompey's camp. Pompey was to sail to Africa to deal with the Marians under Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus. Domitius had also allied with the Numidian king Hyarbus. In only 40 days of campaigning in Africa did Pompey defeat Domitius and Hyarbus. Pompey was hailed as imperator and for the first time called Magnus. Sulla then ordered Pompey to disband all but one legion and to wait for a successor to arrive, but Pompey was not about to give up his new position. But he knew he couldn't risk open war with Sulla. But he also knew that Sulla did not want to disrupt the newly found peace and restored constitutional normality. And Pompey had performed incredible services to the Republic and to Sulla as to risk open war. So Sulla conceded, and Pompey returned to Italy at the head of his army. Sulla congratulated him and addressed him as Magnus, instructing others to do the same. But Pompey demanded a triumph, but Sulla opposed. Only a senator could gain a triumph, and Pompey was too young to become one just yet. But Pompey persisted, and with the death of his new wife, Sulla swallowed his pride and shouted, "Let him triumph!" Pompey during his triumph wanted to be led by 4 elephants on his chariot, but they couldn't fit through the city gate, so they had to be abandoned. On March 12th, most likely in 81 BC, Pompey celebrated his first triumph at the age of 24, which makes him the first equestrian to receive a triumph. He also married, again offered by Sulla, Mucia, half-sister of the 2 Metelli, who were in due course to reach the consulship, Metellus Celer in 60 and Nepos in 57. Now, the decades of the 70s is often referred to as the decade of dismantling of the Sulla system, especially by Pompey during his consulship in 70. However, this is not the case. Pompey was, for all intents and purposes, a Sullan. Before we dive into this, let's first understand what was the Sullan constitution. Sulla, during his dictatorship, doubled the number of senators from 300 to about 600, but because of the social war and the civil war between Marius and Sulla, the number had diminished from around 300 to around 200. They had to fill 400 new seats. Most of these came from the equestrian order, who for a long time now were anxious to enter the Senate. However, Italian leaders were also brought into the Roman Senate. Sulla reduced the eligibility for juries to the senatorial order. He increased the number of quaestors to 20, as well as you could not enter the Senate without first being a quaestor. The number of praetors was increased to 8. As a consul, you could not become one again within 10 years. The tribunate had its power severely reduced. If you were a tribune, you were not allowed to enter into any magisterial office. You could no longer propose legislation, and its power of veto was reduced. This was because in the past there were those who stirred up unrest through the tribunate. One thinks of the Gracchi brothers, who bypassed the Senate and went straight to the People's Assembly. Now, this office would only attract second-rate individuals. If the people had a problem, they would look to the Senate. Sulla's intention was to nullify those institutions of government that allowed the past decade to take place, which resulted in fratricidal warfare. Expanding the senatorial order, nullifying the tribunate, was an attempt to soften discontents and potential upheavals. But this was not complete, and serious challenges began to occur against the Sullan order. Sulla's land allotment and colonial foundations for his supporters compelled Sulla to dispossess numerous farmers and landowners. Italians, especially the Samnites, who fought against Sulla during the Social War, suffered proscriptions and confiscation. His political enemies suffered execution or exile, along with their sons disenfranchised. After Sulla's death in 78, the consul of 78, Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, took up their cause along with his legate, Marcus Junius Brutus, in Italy as well as Sertorius in Spain. Lepidus sought to recall the survivors of the proscriptions, to deal with the land situation of the dispossessed, and possibly the restoration of the tribunate office. Lepidus was an ambitious aristocrat, having reached the consulship from the money collected from Sulla's proscriptions and through the support of Pompey. However, when Sulla died in 78, he evidently sought preeminence. Even when Lepidus took up the cause of those dispossessed, the Senate was willing to tolerate him. When at Faesulae in Etruria, Etrurian citizens attacked the garrisons and colonies of Sullan veterans, Lepidus attached himself to the rebels. But even though the attack was an open revolt, Lepidus was still not seen as a rebel. The Senate was horrified at the idea of another civil war and made Lepidus, along with his colleague Quintus Lutatius Catulus, to swear an oath not to attack one another. They also granted Lepidus the provinces of Transalpine and Cisalpine Gaul. It was when Lepidus marched on Rome that the Senate sought to deal with him. Such was the nature of politics. Lepidus then marched on Rome with his insurgents, and some senators were in favor of negotiating with Lepidus. However, Lucius Philippus, an old friend of Pompey, convinced the Senate to pass the Senatus Consultum Ultimum. Catulus was assigned to fight against Lepidus, and the Senate appointed Pompey Magnus to assist him. By mid-77, Catulus and Pompey had completely demolished Lepidus and Brutus. Brutus was executed by Pompey, and Lepidus fled to Sardinia, where he died. Now Sertorius in Spain had set up his own government akin to that of Rome, appointing his own Senate. Metellus Pius was sent to Spain to deal with him in 79, but his efforts were to no avail, and so he requested assistance from the Senate. Sertorius was winning battles, but he couldn't invade Italy. Pompeius was elected to assist Metellus Pius, and both cooperated with each other in Spain. However, things soon deteriorated, and Pompey had to write to the Senate, who were slow and insufficient, complaining to them of the situation. Sallust writes down the letter from Pompey, which is most likely fashioned to fit Sallus's own purposes. So take what I'm about to read with a grain of salt. Sallust writes, "In return for these, grateful fathers, you give me want and hunger. Thus the condition of my army and of that of the enemy is the same. For neither is paid, and either can march victorious into Italy. Of this situation I warn you, and I beg you to give it your attention. Do not force me to provide for my necessities on my own responsibility. Near Spain, so far as it is not in the possession of the enemy, either we or Sertorius have devastated to the point of ruin, except for the coast towns, so that it is actually an expense and a burden to us. Gaul last year supplied the army of Metellus with pay and provisions, but now can scarcely keep itself alive because of a failure of the crops. I myself have exhausted not only my means, but even my credit. You are our only resource. Unless you come to our rescue, against my will, but not without warning from me, our army will pass over into Italy, bringing with it all the war in Spain." Lucius Lucillus and Marcus Cotta, the consuls of 74, who were no friends of Pompey, saw to it that Pompey and Metellus received the help they needed. Rome supplied them with 2 new legions, money, and supplies. By 71, Pompey and Metellus had successfully defeated Sertorius, who was murdered through treachery, and Perperna, who replaced Sertorius, was defeated in 72. By 71, Pompey and Metellus had received triumphs and land grants for their veterans. During Pompey's time in Spain, in 73, Spartacus was leading a slave revolt. The Senate took this issue lightly at first, but by the time they took Spartacus seriously, his numbers had already swelled. He defeated the consular armies of 72 and raised a force of over 120,000 men. What was the goal of these Gallic and Thracian slaves? To break the bonds of their oppression, make their way out of Italy and into freedom. Come late 72, Crassus was put in charge, adding 6 new legions to his army. However, the Senate recalled Pompey from Spain and Lucillus from Macedonia. By the time Pompey had arrived in Italy in 71, Crassus had virtually crushed Spartacus. Pompey fought the last remnants of the slaves, mopping up what was left, and was able to take credit for ending the rebellion, which diminished Crassus's own efforts. Crassus would resent Pompey's actions, and this resentment would last for decades to come. When the year 70 rolled around, both Pompey and Crassus ran for the consulship. Crassus was the obvious choice for the office, but Pompey, however, had no right to it. He held none of the prerequisite offices to make him eligible, and he was not of age, but the Senate granted him an exemption. Pompey was loved at this point. Pompey also made friends wherever he could, from consulares to reformers to new men like Marcus Tullius Cicero. Cicero and Pompey might have actually been childhood friends. Both were born in 106, lived relatively close to one another, and when they lived in Rome, both lived in the same neighborhood. But Pompey will support Cicero during his trial against the infamous Varres. It was during his consulship alongside Crassus that many say that the Sicilian constitution was dismantled. However, that is not the case. They say this because of the restoration of the tribunate. The fact of the matter is that this restoration was inevitable. There had been several attempts before Pompey of senators trying to restore the office, but the Sicilian constitution was resilient and flexible. Pompey's intention was to mend the rift between the Senate and the plebs, and his reform was not only supported by those who were against Sulla, but also of those who were pro-Sulla. The fact of the matter is this: the tribunate restored offered no serious threat to the new order. It was a traditional avenue for prestige and influence, and they wanted it reopened. The establishment could live with it. Pompey also lent his support for judicial reform. Sulla made it only so that the Senate could sit on the jury. The Senate, confident in its growing security, wanted administrative relief. They allowed it so that the Senate sat on 1/3 of the jury, the equites on another, and the tribune aerari as well. This pleased everybody. It should also be mentioned that Pompey and his friends, the consuls of 72, who were now censors of 70, purged the Senate of 64 members by either expelling or censoring. This should not be taken as Pompey's friends removing the opponents of Pompey, but rather a very traditional style of conservatism. They removed notoriously corrupted senators, such as the jurors Marcus Aquilius and Tiberius Guta, as well as unsavory characters like Publius Lentulus Sura and Gaius Antonius, who were known for their criminal activities. This purging of the Senate strengthened rather than weakened it. All in all, what you should take away from the aftermath of Sulla's death is that the Sullan constitution, in intent, was never altered, and that it was only slightly tinkered with to make sure that the Senate ran more smoothly and efficiently, because by the end of 70, the Senate was more secure and more firmly in control than it was before. After his consulship, Pompey took a break from politics. Now before I continue, I must discuss Lucillus and the war against Mithradites. Lucillus is one of those men who does not get as much attention as he should compared to the great men of the late Roman Republic. A quick background of Lucillus: he fought in the social war and earned the respect of Sulla. He was educated and earned distinction in the literary sphere. He was a great collector of arts and loved intellectual discussions. He was a stern disciplinarian, a great military commander, and a great administrator. Sulla entrusted Lucillus to execute his will, to publish his memoirs, and with the education of his son. Now Lucillus had received the command against Mithradites in 74. He scored many victories and cracked down hard on the extortionate practices of moneylenders in Asia. He also reorganized the province and revitalized the area, which had been devastated by the war. This, however, caused a lot of issues back in Rome. In 69 BC, the equites were greatly upset at the fact that they could not extort everyone in Asia, and so accused Lucillus of the same accusation that they had claimed against Quintus Metellus in the Jugurthine War, that Lucillus was deliberately extending the war to retain his command and enhance his glory. On the military front, even though Lucillus was gaining victories, the war was not decisively won, and so Lucillus's troops began to become mutinous, refusing to obey his orders. Now Pompey was deeply interested in the outcome of Lucillus's fate. He wanted Lucillus's command. Pompey wanted to swoop in, finish the war that had been mostly won by Lucillus, very reminiscent of Crassus against Spartacus, and claim all the glory for himself. In 67, a tribune by the name of Gabinius, who was friends with Pompey and most likely acting on his behalf, introduced a law to replace Lucillus in Bithynia et Pontus with consul of 67 Marcus Glabrio, which passed. Piracy was becoming increasingly out of control. There had been several attempts at piracy suppression, but nothing with lasting success. Since the Mithridatic War, piracy only flourished. They looted famous temples in Greece and Asia Minor, and grew bold enough to raid the shores of Italy. The pirates captured many prominent Romans, including 2 praetors and Gaius Julius Caesar. By 67, it had become so bad that the grain supply to Rome was threatened. Something had to be done. Tribune Gabinius proposed a law. One man chosen amongst the consulares, that is, the men who held the consulship, this individual would have the praetorian imperium for 3 years, the ability to appoint 15 legates, to command a fleet of 200 ships, to levy as many men as needed, to draw from the treasury and the resources from the publicans in the provinces. This was an obvious ploy to have Pompey elected to this command. However, opposition from the Senate was damn near universal. The consul Calpurnius Piso was the most violent towards Pompey, telling him that if he emulated Romulus and defied the Senate, that he would share the same fate as him. Catulus, the most powerful man in Rome, if we are to believe Cicero, of the 60s, came forward against Pompey, and so did his brother-in-law, Hortensius, who was also one of the most powerful men in Rome. Their principal arguments, that no one man should wield so much power. Gabinius himself came under attack from the Senate. This was a deliberate maneuver to curtail Pompey's success. Despite the anti-Pompeian propaganda that Pompey Magnus was a menace to civil order and that he wanted to become a military ruler, he did not want to become one. Pompey Magnus wanted the piracy command for one reason: dignitas. Dignitas was the ultimate goal of every Roman. This command would extend his foreign clientele. He would gather support and loyalty from the equites and career officers. All Pompey wanted was preeminence within the ruling order. He wanted to be the top dog of the aristocracy, not to overcome it or dismantle it. His association with prominent senators was his principal asset. The law, known as the Lex Gabinia, passed, and Pompey was appointed to the command. However, another law passed, possibly followed by a second, which granted Pompey the ability to recruit up to 500 ships, 20 legions, 24 legates, and 2 quaestors. The price of bread, which had greatly risen due to piracy, was immediately dropped back down to normal levels. The people were extremely confident in Pompey. Pompey appointed 13 legates. Some of these men were the censors of 70, Lentulus Clodianus and Gellius Publicola, Metellus Nepos, the future consul of 57, Lucius Manlius Torquatus, the future consul of 65, Marcus Pupius Piso, the consul of 61. As you can see, Pompey was networking. He divided the coast of the Mediterranean into 13 regions, assigned each legate to one. Pompey himself focused on Sardinia, Sicily, and Africa, areas where the grain supply was threatened, and by early spring, he was driving the pirates eastward, back to Cilicia, their base of operations. Pompey also claims that in 40 days he had driven the pirates out of the western Mediterranean, which is probably correct since most of them decided to return to the east. Opposition to Pompey did not lighten. The consul Piso obstructed Pompey to the point that he had to return to Rome. Piso was interfering with recruitment and discharging men which Pompey had already enlisted in Italy and in Cisalpine Gaul, which was Piso's province. Gabinius wanted to take this to court, but Pompey was not willing to go to that extreme, and instead managed to work things out with Piso. He left Italy from Brundisium, where he sailed to Cilicia to deal with the remaining pirates. Pompey sent letters to all the kings and cities in Asia Minor asking for assistance. Even Lucillus will help Pompey by providing him with funds. In 3 months, the war against the pirates was over. Pompey had crushed their fleet at the battle of their last remaining stronghold at Coracesium, which he captured. Even though he was termed the Young Terminator, all the pirates that were captured by him received leniency. He resettled them at various settlements in Asia Minor that were deep inland, where these captured pirates could become farmers. Pompey was acclaimed imperator by his men. During his time dealing with the pirates, Pompey claimed that Crete was part of his jurisdiction, which is probably true, but at the time the proconsul Quintus Caecilius Metellus was in command of the war against the pirates in Crete. Metellus captured many Cretan towns, but Pompey tried to intervene, sending his legate Lucius Octavius to receive the surrender of the Cretan towns. However, Metellus refused to recognize Pompey's authority and attacked the Cretan towns that had already surrendered to Pompey. A fight broke out between the legate and Metellus drove Octavius out. Pompey was about to sail to Crete to deal with Metellus. However, news arrived that he received the Mithridatic command. Metellus conquered the island and was saluted as imperator and was bestowed the name Creticus for his efforts there. The tribune of 66, Gaius Manlius, proposed a law to give Pompey the Mithridatic command, but this was seriously opposed to the point that the Senate had to annul the bill. Manlius tried to blame Crassus for the bill. Manlius tried again, and this time proposed to give Pompey command of Cilicia, Bithynia, and Pontus. 2 of the most powerful men in Rome, Catulus and Hortensius, spoke out against the bill, but this time Pompey had support. Pompey was endorsed by 4 consulares, Publius Servilius Fatia, Gaius Scribonius Curio, Gaius Cassius Longinus, and Gnaeus Lentulus Clodianus. Pompey had numerous support from patricians and illustrious plebeians. Cicero and Caesar will support Pompey. The bill passed, and Pompey received the news before he could clash with Metellus in Crete. Pompey had retained his command under the Lex Gabinia. His legates during the war against the pirates retained their command. New men will join Pompey, such as Gabinius, the brother of Metellus Nepos, Metellus Celer, the future consul of 60, as well as Pompey's trusted lieutenant, Lucius Afranius. And like I said since the beginning of this video, Pompey was the man you wanted to be friends with.